Coming to you live. And I had an interesting video come my way about this full moon. So, a video made and posted to YouTube by a geophysicist was brought to my attention. And it was very interesting. And he was talking specifically about this full moon tomorrow. So, tomorrow's full moon, March the 7th, 2023. And he was saying, based on his scientific expertise as a geophysicist, it's very likely to see increased activities of earthquakes. Places like Northern California. What else was it? South Pacific, like Vanuatu. And the third location escapes me. Maybe more in Turkey. But anyway, different places around the world can possibly expect it. So I'm going to talk about this full moon, get into the astrology and some of the mythology, like I usually do. But I'm going to touch upon the science too. And really, I wanted to make this video to be in keeping with this theme for March, this theme of don't feed the hype. So we've seen these earthquakes in Turkey and Syria. We may see some more. We may see some in California and some other places. All right. So in keeping with this theme, don't feed the hype, I want to bring it to people's attention that there are things in the natural world going on with the sun, with the moon, with plasma, with various types of radiation, so various types of energies interacting with the earth that can contribute to these events like earthquakes. So in a segment of the population, there's definitely a tendency whenever an earthquake happens, they jump right to, oh, it's the Illuminati and the Satanists, and they used the harp and the machine in Antarctica run by Raytheon where they do satanic rituals and cause earthquakes. And it's like, yeah, people are playing with some pretty fucked up technology, and they're screwing around with scalar weapons and plasma and all this stuff, but the natural world is still running and it's doing its thing. And natural disasters happen for very natural reasons, also because of the influence of human consciousness on the natural world. So, you just don't have perpetual smooth sailing in life just because you follow the science or, you read the Bible every day. It's like life throws curveballs at you so that you'll learn and grow. So, yeah, people may jump to the whole Illuminati, Satanist, harp, weather weapons thing. It's like, well, yeah, people are playing with that shit for sure for at least 50-something years. But the natural world's going on, and there's a lot of narcissism in the world. So this whole thing where the Satanists or some spiritual being just sits around all day fucking twisting his sinister mustache, figuring out ways to torment you. That's very narcissistic. Now, in the scope of this video, our current mainstream understanding of global warming, that's also very narcissistic. That it's just humans causing climate change. Climate change has been happening forever, for thousands of years. And it's just a known fact that a volcanic eruption will generate 3 or 4 times as much CO2 as all of human activity has ever done. But what has happened is the narcissistic religious guilt, especially Christian guilt, has been funneled into the secular world. And so we think that everything going on with the planet that doesn't support our efforts to develop real estate and, so on and so forth, and, not have our activities disrupted. We think it's all about it. We make it all about us. Narcissists make everything all about them. So there's religious narcissism and there's secular narcissism, and they're pretty much the same thing. So anyway, let's get into this full moon. But yeah, the climate change people should look at what the sun's doing. Because now that we can measure it, we should look at it because it's got a lot to do with freaking climate change. And this is actually something that the Vedic culture, when it moved into India thousands of years ago, already knew about. They have all the solar cycles tracked for many thousands of years. Even the grand solar cycle of like 480 something thousand years. So anyway, okay, so we've got this full moon. So I'm looking at sidereal primarily. Visible sky astrology, not the mainstream tropical. So in sidereal astrology, this full moon's happening at 22 degrees of Leo. Tropical, it's like 16 Virgo. So this sidereal placement being in Leo, this is the sign of the sun. So the moon's in Leo. Whenever you get a full moon, moon and sun are in opposite signs. That's how it works. It's an alignment from sun to earth to moon. Full moons, you have those three bodies lined up. So because the moon's in Leo, sun is in the opposite sign, Aquarius. So the sun is reflecting off of the moon while the moon is in the sun's sign. So it's kind of one of those big deal full moons of the year because the solar new year is coming on March 21st this year. The solar new year for thousands of years has always been new moon in Pisces, which is anywhere from March 21st through the first week in April. Falls somewhere in there, fluctuates from year to year. So a big, powerful full moon. I look at a full moon. On the one hand, it's like something is being born. So something is bursting forth into the light. Another way to look at the full moon, it is the moon, the mind, because the moon is symbolic for the mind, our individual minds and the collective mind. So the mind is not just the intellect. It's not the calculator in your head, the problem solver, but the mind is your emotional consciousness, your emotional self. Sun is symbolic for the soul, not just your individual soul, but the soul we're all part of, what people have called God. So the full moon, the moon is fully reflecting the light of the sun. The mind is fully reflecting the light of the soul. And this is why people feel anxious, uneasy, highly emotional during full moons. Go talk to firemen, police officers, people who work in the emergency room. They'll all tell you people act crazy during the full moon. It's more violence, there's more accidents. People have a hard time being logical and rational when their emotions flare. So when the mind, the moon, is fully reflecting the light of the soul, the sun, all of the emotions that you don't want to deal with in the normal run of things in your day-to-day life, they come to the surface for you to deal with them. So, and this is, I think full moons are like Mercury retrogrades. They help us to clean out the operating system. You know, without either one of those things, we'd go insane because just so many things we'd have so many emotions and so many thoughts just piling up. So it has to discharge and it has to clean out. And in it's like I tell people in my acupuncture practice, healing doesn't tickle. So, when I insert a needle and they're like, ow, I'm like, well, healing doesn't tickle. So I don't know what to tell you. And it's interesting too, the moon also accumulates radiation from the sun, from coronal mass ejections and from the solar wind. And this is actually, the moon actually sends this radiation back to Earth, sends plasma and electrons back to Earth during the full moons. So there's a very rationally explainable phenomenon going on during the full moons. I'm going to get into that a bit later. So, yeah. So the full moon, we're basically forced by the natural world, by our mind and our soul, moon and sun, to deal with our feelings, which we would rather stuff in the closet. And it's like I'm always saying, men deny that they have feelings, women avoid their feelings. Adds up to pretty much the same thing in the end, but since women don't deny they have them, they live a couple more years, statistically. They're not killed by their feelings as fast as men generally. So yeah, so this full moon, like I said, it's in Leo. It's in a lunar mansion constellation. So sidereal astrology, we look at lunar mansions. The 12 sun signs are made up of 27 smaller constellations called lunar mansions. So these lunar mansions make a sign, the placement of the planet in a sign, much more specific, because within a given sign, you have 2.5 lunar mansions, which is very different personalities. So the lunar mansion that this full moon takes place in, where the moon is placed, it's called Dionysus, which is the Greek name. The Roman name is Bacchus. So, and then the Vedic name is like Purva Falguni. So I spoke about this in my monthly video, but Dionysus, the grain god, so the god of the harvest, the god of fertility. Dionysus is the vegetation god, so his body, grain, vegetables, fruits, all types of plants, produce. And in his statues, he's always shown holding a bunch of grapes. Grape juice is the blood of grapes. You ferment grape juice through an alchemical process, you make wine. So again, this is where the Catholic communion comes from. Take this is my body, eat of my body, drink of my blood. The satanic panic thing back in the 1980s, these so-called conspiracy experts tried to say it was Catholic cannibalism. Well, no, the Catholic Church absorbed the rites of Dionysus. So Dionysus was not a satanic whatever the fuck. Dionysus was a savior because he feeds the earth. And his mother was the virgin earth. He was born of a virgin. So Dionysus is this grain god. Dionysus is also, and I forgot this in my monthly video, Dionysus is a god of intoxication. So the mundane view of this is like, and like I said before, I'm not putting Christian people down. I'm not saying people, must abandon their religion, but I'm saying know the origins of your religion. It's good to know where things come from. It's good to know where things originate. So Christianity got to be the dominant religion in Europe because they conducted propaganda campaigns, smear campaigns. They beat people, they killed people, they burned people's houses down, they burned people's businesses down, they burned the Library of Alexandria. They destroyed 80% of the writings and artwork of the classical world. They got to be the dominant religion through thuggery. So it's like I tell people, I'm not saying abandon your religion if you're a Christian, but know where it comes from and vow to never let that type of religious fundamentalist behavior happen again. So, yeah, Dionysus was, so the Christians maligned, they ran smear campaigns against the rites of Dionysus, the celebrations of Dionysus. And they said, oh, well, those Dionysian followers are just a bunch of alcoholics and they have orgies and da-da-da. The wine with Dionysus is just a symbol for intoxication. So Dionysus carries around a staff that has a pine cone on it. You can look this up. A lot of you watching this are familiar with the idea that the pine cone is symbolic of the pineal gland. So the type of intoxication that's being referred to through the mysteries and the rites of Dionysus, it's spiritual intoxication. It's much like with the god Odin, Wotan, the god Odin in the Germanic world. He was a god of intoxication because it was about being intoxicated with basically spiritual energy, the spiritual world. And I think the Pentecostal church is really, it's a throwback to this pre-Christian idea of spiritual intoxication. Because that's a big thing that's missing in church is feeling something, really feeling something. The Pentecostals have this. I think the Latin Mass actually helped people feel something, which was mostly done away with by Vatican II back in the 60s. But anyway, Dionysus dealing with spiritual intoxication. So pineal gland produces the DMT. You release that DMT or you make more of it. You produce more of it on an ongoing basis. You experience a spiritual intoxication. You tap into that spiritual world and your perception changes. Now, in a lot of statues of Dionysus, his hair is actually made up of mushrooms. So you see mushrooms in a lot of religious art. In the earliest depictions of the Garden of Eden story, back in the early Middle Ages, Adam and Eve are shown standing around a giant mushroom. In the old days, even in the present day, Jewish and Islamic leaders wore mushroom hats that look just like mushrooms. Jesus was often depicted, in the presence of some sort of a mushroom. And even John Allegro, who helped the Vatican scholars translate the Dead Sea Scrolls, said, these apostles were running a mushroom cult. So that's why Dionysus often has mushrooms for hair. So Dionysus, it's not about doing the drugs or drinking the alcohol, but it's about the spiritual intoxication. It's about tapping into that spiritual world and being immersed in it. Now, ingesting certain substances can be a catalyst for this, but you get an uncontrollable, unpredictable experience. What you get a better yield from is by, over a course of years, disciplining yourself in a spiritual practice so you can willingly go into these spiritual realms. And you don't get a hangover when you come out of it, but you can be conscious within those spiritual experiences and basically, direct your own experience and, remember it and take something back into your daily life from that experience. So Dionysus. So Dionysus is this god of intoxication. He's a savior. He was a friend to humanity, especially being, the grain god, the food god, a fertility god. Always looking to help people. So this is very good. And I think Jesus took on a lot of these qualities of Dionysus. Now, and interestingly, Dionysus, speaking of Jesus, Dionysus was eaten by his followers, Last Supper. It's right. It's even in the Bible. Take this and eat of it. This is my body, and da 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 da. This is my blood. So Dionysus' followers would eat him, and then he'd be reborn from his mother, the Virgin Earth. So Dionysus was constantly reborn, just like the sun. So a lot of different facets to these savior gods. So anyway, Dionysus always willing to help people. Now, the other side of the coin. Sometimes people think they know what's best for others. Sometimes they actually do know, but you can't force insight and advice and solutions onto other people. So with everything else going on in the astrology, especially mid-month, with March coming back to sidereal 0 degrees Gemini 0 being the miracle degree, where it began its retrograde back in October, November. And Gemini being the sign of mass media and communications. So yeah, there'll be some media shitstorms going on. In the midst of all this, with the energy of this full moon, yeah, people will probably, like usual, think they know what's best for other people, whether they be the secular scientific atheists or the Christians and Muslims and, whatever type of religious people. They'll all think they know what's best for other people, and they'll all think they know exactly what the truth is. And people are disruptive when they think they have the truth and they want to force it onto other people. So, and that's the thing about Leo is the sign of the sun, the sign of royalty, leadership, executive figures. So this is the thing to pay attention to here. Now, the sun on this day, on March 7th, it's not conjunct with, but it's in the same sign, Aquarius, of Mercury and Saturn. And so there's some influence. Mercury is the intellect. Mercury is the prince or the page. That Mercury is the closest planet to the sun. So the idea is that this prince or this page, which is Mercury, it's the closest to the royal throne and it can hear what the sun is saying. So, but then it also travels. But, at this time, Mercury's close. Saturn's in the same sign. It's what? 17 degrees away, but it's not far off. But Saturn is approaching that 7th degree of Aquarius, 2 degrees away. So it's basically conjunct that 7th degree of Aquarius, which is America's natal moon. So the natal moon is in the 3rd house of communications, mass media, sign of Aquarius, the people, we the people. So there's also Saturn's bringing karma to this facet of American life, of mass media. And American media is almost like the mass media for the world at this point. It's very widely proliferated. So there's karma coming to this media. So things are being revealed, but then the media, to cover its own ass and to cover the ass of its owners, it is playing more games and trying to hide the truth. So in the light of the sun that's reflecting off this new moon, there'll be some of that energy in there. All right, so I want to get to the more scientific portion of this. And again, I'm not a geophysicist. I'm not a physicist. I just have enough engineering and scientific studies under my belt where I'm not completely I'm not completely intimidated by these subjects. But if I misspeak, well, it's not my field of expertise. And I'm actually going to put the video in the comments, the video I'm going to refer to made by this geophysicist. It's not my forte. I can glean general concepts. So anyway, this geophysicist who's speaking about this full moon, what he's pointed out is that in the last couple of weeks, so I think going back to about the 27th, 28th of February, there's been an unusually high amount of solar activity, coronal mass ejections. This has been going on for some time. And, if you go back into September, there was a 2-week blackout of the Schumann resonance. So the Schumann resonance, it is an energetic pulse. It's like an EMP that the Earth, the core of the Earth, actually emits and is detectable in the upper atmosphere. When you get unusually high solar radiation, this pulse of the Earth, this Schumann resonance, is not detectable. So this happens, for a day or so, maybe 2 days with regularity. But back in September 2022, it was an unprecedented 2-week blackout. So that's a big deal. And I think there is something to this concept of a solar wave, a solar flash. I think the sun is going to do something unusual in the next, let's see, what year is it? Next 3 years. I think the sun will do something unusual or have a series of unusual events that'll actually change human consciousness. So a lot of people are wondering, how are we as humanity going to get out of these messes we're in, especially with these globalists who we've given all of our authority and power to, and we really don't know how to take it back. Boycott's a good start, by the way. Bernie Sanders, these men and women of the people never talk about boycotts. Read up on boycotts, very powerful. But anyway, people ask, how are we going to get out of these situations? And the natural world is going to give us that catalyst. I think the natural world is going to change mass human consciousness. We're basically going to get flooded with a bunch of radiation. It's going to make our minds work a little differently. I don't think, more government procedure, more advocacy groups, more citizen petitions, more Bible, Quran reading. None of that's gonna eating soy. None of that's gonna save the world. Our perception's gonna change due to natural phenomenon. So, as this geophysicist points out, there's been unusually high sun activity, solar flare activity. Now, this image I used as a thumbnail, it shows the alignment of sun, earth, moon. Now, what you see around, you see this sort of bubble around the earth. So the earth has a magnetic protective barrier around it called the magnetosphere. Now, since the earth is moving, it's not an even circle around the earth. It actually sort of turns into like a teardrop. The earth is in here and it's moving this way. It's like a teardrop. So the earth has like basically a magnetic kind of a comet tail. It's like, when a boat moves through a body of water, a motor-powered boat, it puts off a wake. So if you've ever been in a kayak, and you move across a motorboat's wake, you start rocking around, moving up and down as you pass through that wake. So the earth has that tail. Now, what happens is when the plasma from the sun hits that magnetic barrier, it goes around the earth and it makes that teardrop shape. Now, what happens is the moon, every full moon, the moon actually passes through that wake that the earth is creating. So again, that plasma from these coronal mass ejections, from these solar flares, it hits the Earth's magnetic barrier and it basically, it moves around it. So it moves around it and then it like reconverges on the backside. So it's basically making a comet tail of plasma. So the moon, around every full moon, it passes through that wake, through that tail of plasma coming off the Earth's magnetic field, the magnetosphere, its magnetic protection. So it takes 6 days. So basically 3 days before the full moon, 3 days after is when the moon is passing through that. So when that happens, the lunar surface that faces the sun, it's bombarded with this radiation. The sun's light sort of neutralizes a lot of it, keeps the negative, not negative like mentally, emotionally negative, but negative polar charge from accumulating on the lit surface of the moon. But then this negative charge actually collects on the dark side of the moon, interestingly enough. So what'll happen is as the moon is passing through this tail, this wake that the earth is putting off, this energy from the sun will actually like go around the moon. It's like in the movie Apollo 13, or if you look into the story of Apollo 13. When the Apollo 13 astronauts had that emergency in space, instead of using fuel to just turn around between the Earth and the moon and waste all that fuel to come back, they just decided they would keep going towards the moon and they would slingshot. They would go around the dark side of the moon and let the moon's gravity pull them around. So they kind of go into a lunar orbit and then they will come out of it. So this energy from the sun will actually do that. I wish I'd drawn some diagrams here. But this energy from the moon will actually get directed back to the earth. So in this teardrop, so the earth's in here and it's got this teardrop, magnetic protection, and the moon will be back here. So there's kind of this dead space. It's not a dead space, but it's within the earth's energetic protection, its magnetosphere. The moon will actually, in this relatively hollow space, the moon will send that energy to the earth. again, during these 6 days, when the moon is passing through the plasma tail, this wake that's being created by the Earth. So it'll send it back. And that's why people have heightened emotional states during the full moon. It's why people often, they can't sleep, during on or around the full moon. And if you've ever read the stories of H.P. Lovecraft, the science fiction writer, a lot of his horror stories are set during the waning gibbous moon. So it's the night after the maximum full moon, where the moon starts to wane, where there's basically just a crescent of shadow on the moon. And, I've always wondered if when the moon first starts to darken that night after the full moon, if basically the moon, if the energy in the moon is getting squeezed and sent to the Earth. Could be, I don't know the science well enough. So what does this all mean if we're getting... So this happens during every full moon, where the moon is actually sending the solar radiation to the Earth. But during times like this, when there's unusually high solar flare activity, it's much more intense. So back to the point, these scientists are saying, well, one, we're going to get a spring tide, or we're going to get an unusually high tide during this full moon, for one. But then they're saying in areas of the world where the fault lines, the meetings of these tectonic plates, in areas where there's a lot of stress, basically this radiation is going to be channeled from the sun to the moon into the ionosphere. The ionosphere is the high atmosphere of the Earth, the highest level before you reach the magnetosphere, the magnetic barrier. Goes into the ionosphere, and then it'll be transferred into the Earth itself, into the crust of the Earth, into the tectonic plates. And the Earth's crust, the Earth's tectonic plates, actually has a lot of energy moving through it. Have you ever heard of telluric currents? So these telluric currents interact with the ionospheric currents. So when you get this interaction in parts of the Earth where the Earth is experiencing a lot of stress and friction, you can get an earthquake. So I think this is the case with the recent earthquake in Turkey. And some scientists are making predictions that California, what is it? I think, Northern California, Santa Clara Mountains, I think San Jose Basin, something like that. Who the hell knows? But the scientists are saying, look out for it. Here are the reasons. So I wanted to make this to just contribute to this theme that I set for March, which is don't feed the hype. So don't just jump to the conclusion that the globalists, did this using HAARP while you created the earthquake using HAARP while conducting a satanic ritual. The natural world is still running. But I think what we have ahead of us is a lot of awakening, a lot of change. So right now we're in solar cycle 25. So I think this is the 25th recorded solar cycle since the mainstream, at least, of science has had the ability to observe solar cycles. Interestingly, solar cycles are 11-year cycles. So you get this 11 as a magic number. So this one, solar cycle 25 that we're in, started 2019, runs till 2030. And it's like I'm always saying, by 2030, you're not going to recognize the world. So I think 2019 to 2030 it's like the end of the world as we know it. It's not the end of the world, but I often call it the end of mom and dad's pretty world. Because for the whole Cold War era, people never looked at the cost of what it would cost other people for them to have beautiful things. to have a new car every 2 years and have a house full of all kinds of crap you really don't need. People never thought about the cost of these things, and it has hurt the environment. And you need constant warfare to keep the banking system going so people in the Western world can keep consuming. So all that is going to come tumbling down. So the solar cycle 25 that started in 2019 ends in 2030. And from what I've heard from, looking at what scientists are saying, it culminates, solar cycle 25 will culminate in end of 2025 into 2026. So this coincides with, you've got the Pluto return for America, summer 2024, which is the second American Revolution 2.0. 2026, Neptune comes to where it was in 1861 when the American Civil War began. So I think division within the US and pretty much every country around the world, larger countries anyway, that were basically put together by force. And then the Uranus cycle. So this September, Uranus goes to where it was in September 1939 when World War II began. So the world is changing and the solar cycle is culminating right when it's going to kind of be the hottest, emotionally and psychically. So 2025, 2026. So anyway, that's enough of that. Hope you got something out of this. Talk to you later.